Ms. Foo Mee Har.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, thank you for allowing me to join the debate. Sir, recovering nations the world over are now beginning to embrace living with COVID as a strategic reality. Each nation has formulated its own strategy to lift restrictions and give ways and find ways to return to a more normal way of living, with UK leading the charge by declaring Freedom Day. Developing COVID resilience is therefore crucial to securing and adapting Singapore's economic competitiveness. Yesterday in Parliament, the MTF shared Singapore's roadmap towards treating the virus as endemic. However, some quarters remain skeptical how well this will be executed and carried through. Just as we thought we had seen light at the end of the tunnel, the sudden rollback of Phase 2 Heightened Alert arising from the Jurong Fishery Port and KTV clusters dealt a fresh blow to businesses and community at large. Whilst most understand the need to tighten restrictions until we achieve a higher vaccination rates, many Singaporeans wonder if the approach could have been better calibrated, such as allowing 2 fully vaccinated diners to a table instead of banning dining in outright. This consideration seems reasonable in the light of government's earlier signal that Singapore should learn to live with an endemic COVID in our midst, so that with robust public health defenses in place, we shift our focus from zero COVID to living with COVID. We have developed enhanced testing and tracing capabilities, good control over infection rates, kept hospitalization rates low, and appear to be able to ring-fence the spread of infection. Compared to mid-May, when only 24% of our population was fully vaccinated, and Phase 2 Heightened Alert had to be first imposed, our vaccination rate has since more than doubled to about half of our population this round. We should expect living with COVID to include intermittent outbreaks and even emergence of new variants every now and then. Having worked so hard to build our defenses, shouldn't we be adopting a more confident posture? As part of living with COVID, we should establish a suite of leading indicators that better predict the imposition of restrictions so that businesses and public are not constantly caught by surprise. These indicators could be based on a combination of key health metrics, including infection rates, vaccination rates, hospitalization rates, ICU admissions, and fatality, a so-called COVID index, which businesses and individuals can monitor for a shared sense of vigilance and ownership. I guess something similar to what Member Gerald Giam has mentioned earlier. We should guide Singaporeans to read and interpret this COVID index away from the focus on infection rates alone, which may shape their behavior. Affected businesses may also rely on a set of new norms to sustain their operations, from qualification for rental relief and contract variations to wage support and credit support, so that the burden is shared more fairly every time restrictions are imposed. They should not have to rely on the goodwill of landlords, nor individual negotiation with financial institutions to keep the line of credit flowing each time restrictions are enforced. There should also be a basic package of state-sponsored COVID support that individuals and businesses can expect to kick in every time restrictions are announced, rather than uncertain drip feed of measures that many believe are subject to negotiation and lobbying. Sir, as vaccination is the key to achieving COVID resilience, I agree our focus should be to achieve 80% vaccination rate in the near term, especially amongst vulnerable seniors. The Minister for Trade and Industry yesterday urged businesses to get medically eligible staff to get vaccinated and to deploy unvaccinated employees to lower risk settings. I would like to ask, will Singapore consider the French government's approach to impose vaccination as a requirement for certain professions at higher risk? Sir, as the Finance Minister has pointed out, a critical part of our recovery process is the reopening of our borders. This is not just about GDP growth. It is in fact an existential issue for Singapore as an international business hub. We survive and thrive on our ability to connect our businesses and people to the region and the world. As other countries move more aggressively to reopen their borders, I'm glad to hear that the prospect of travelling with few restrictions is in sight if it comes through early September. I've heard senior regional executives begin to question the value of being based in Singapore as they are no longer able to travel freely in and out of the country for business. Some are considering leaving for good, as it is no longer tenable for them to be separated from family and loved ones for such extended period of time. This is bolstered by the increasing adoption of work anywhere policies, as well as new growth opportunities in their home countries. Sir, the government should be lauded for its well-executed labour policy during the pandemic. Singapore has managed to cushion itself from unemployment hardship suffered by other countries because of COVID-19. The government spared no expense in supporting businesses to hire locals, with significant levels of government funding directed towards Job Support Scheme and Job Growth Incentive Scheme, JGI scheme, including this round. Under the JGI scheme, 270,000 Singaporeans and permanent residents were hired by 42,000 businesses as of February 2021, as reported, with generous wage support of up to 50% of the first 6,000 of the grossly monthly salary for up to 18 months, and that's generous. 1/3 of those hired had been out of work for more than 6 months, and about 60% previously employed in a different sector. While I applaud the success of the scheme, it is still unclear how businesses can make the transition without continued government support. As JGI scheme has primarily supported SMEs in their manpower needs, the scheme has helped previously unemployed as well as mid-career switchers with job opportunities. I urge the government to extend the scheme and to carefully calibrate how it is phased out so that the benefits remain deeply rooted. Sir, there is room for the government to act with equal resolve to uplift the plight of low-wage workers, provide more safety nets for those who have lost their jobs, and redouble our efforts to build a strong Singaporean core along with global talent. The pandemic has evoked heightened awareness of such vulnerabilities and gaps. Rather than keeping status quo, we should seize the moment to build consensus on how we may address these issues collectively. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have seen COVID-19 unleash a wave of innovation. The speed at which COVID-19 vaccines were developed served to remind us that, with the right conditions, major scientific breakthroughs such as success of the messenger RNA technique behind Pfizer BioNTech and Moderna vaccines are possible. We're also reminded that moving fast and removing barriers are the best things government can do. Despite the increasingly tight fiscal position, I support the government's continued commitment to the Research Innovation Enterprise 2025 plan, setting aside 25 billion to support innovation and new discoveries. Good that this was not reprioritized, so it's good that we kept this. However, this effort must be accompanied by the government's intervention to ensure innovations are translated into real-world solutions beyond the labs and scientific publications and are diffused through our economy. Businesses must be able to harness such technologies to raise productivity and ultimately contribute to higher living standards. Research funding should be prioritized accordingly and be scrutinized to delivering economic value to the wider society. Nurturing ground-up innovation can be equally important. The number of registered home offices saw an increase of 25% in 2020, with the pandemic reviewing new entrepreneurial opportunities. These enterprises are the very example of micro-resilience that we need to cultivate, as they are the seedlings of future enterprises if properly nurtured. To understand how we can support the acceleration process, we need to review if existing policies are conducive to current trends and to build support measures that lowers barriers to entry, broaden the scope of economic activities, and implement oversight frameworks for the industry to flourish. For instance, in the home-based food business, which runs the gamut of home bakeries to private kitchens, the regulations under HDB, URA, and SFA should be reviewed to support artisanal home-based activity and a relevant set of regulations to meet with appropriate levels of commercial standards for safety and hygiene. But they should not be so onerous as to stifle these budding enterprises. Sir, Singapore is no stranger to overcoming adversity and building resilience with and for our people. Let us transform our recovery to build back better, broader, and stronger. We did it before, and we'll do it again. With that, I support the supplementary supply bill.